coordinate measurements to each of the subplots. And I think that that's a great suggestion. And to bounce off of that, I want to add that part of this training here is to get feedback exactly like that. Okay, so yeah, we all come with our own experience. We all come with our own knowledge and brains and creativity. So yeah, if you at any point find some places where you think, okay, add this variable, it's going to save time later, it's going to make things make more sense, I'm definitely open to that. The important part is that we get all as much of that feedback before we go to the field, right? Because once we start this work, we have to make sure that every plot is measured consistently. So yeah, having that kind of feedback now, before we go to the field, that's great. So I have a little list here of things that I will accomplish in the next evenings and tomorrow and Saturday before we go to the field, and that is to add coordinates to each subplot on the field sheet and in the collect survey. I will update the species list since Fabian just sent that to me. In the best case, before we go to the field, I can already add base maps from the national park to the GPS and to Trimble. That would be great. For that, it would be great if I could have someone from the national park who says, hey Mary, let me take care of that one, because I have quite a long list of things to do, but let me know. All right, and that's what I have. So yeah, please, any other feedback, let me know and I will make it happen. Okay, now we're ready to learn collect before lunch. This will be our session before lunch, and then after lunch, we're gonna go outside and practice. Can I get a quick show of hands? Has anybody in the room already worked with collect before? Have you already made a survey, worked with a survey, input data in a survey? Okay, good to know. Have you worked with a similar system? So have you input your data directly into a tablet or a smartphone in the field? Have you used a different similar system? I heard a few days ago the idea to just have Excel on your smartphone and directly put your data into Excel. That's actually so brilliant. So yeah, all this kind of information is very appreciated. All right. Hey, I think it's already quite an accomplishment that we have made it to my last presentation. If you have looked at the Google Drive, there are so many presentations up there, and we are finally on the last one. And after this presentation, everything's going to be interactive, and then we're pretty much done. So you can give yourselves a pat on the back for already making it this far. All right, so we all know this, but let me give a quick reminder. We have a tree survey, rockland survey, and deadwood survey for all, for all plots, to measure on all plots. We have field sheets, which you've already seen and been introduced to, and a collect mobile survey for all of those. This is what it looks like to actually put data into collect. So yeah, these are just screenshots from the tablet. So you click on the survey that you want to use. You have all of the variables that are on the plot sheets here on the side, and then you go inside and enter. So the example you can see here, we're in the subplot measurement, and we start with plot A1. Within plot A1, subplot A1, here we have the species identification. So again, you can see that genus, species, and then the code next to it. All right, and once we finish and add all the data into this tablet, it directly goes to Excel, ready to use. All right, this session is going to talk about, okay, what is Open Forest? Because that's where this tool comes from. What's the difference between collect and collect mobile? And then for each of those tools, I'm going to describe, okay, how do we create and import a survey? How do we edit, translate, and export a survey using collect? Then how do we import a survey into our devices, our tablets, or our smartphones? how do we collect data, and what does it look like to export and save that data? Okay, so what is Open Forest? Open Forest is a collection of open source software tools for forestry-related data collection and data analysis. It is developed by the United Nations FAO, and it's used very broadly, and I think it's only going to increase for the rest of our lives. So for example, the National Forest Inventories of Bhutan, of Peru, of Laos already use this tool. And I have a little bit of information that the Indonesian National Forest Inventory is also going to start using this tool. So, for all of you sitting in this room who are all Indonesians, it's a really great idea to know how to use this tool, to have experience with using this tool, because I don't think it's going away, and I think it's only going to be used more and more. You can see here the 8 tools available in Open Forest. So there's many of them. I personally have used Collect and Collect Mobile, and I've also used Collect Earth. So Collect Earth is a tool that's often used with different GIS systems, and you can get information on past satellite images to do like a land use, land cover change analysis. So that's why I've used it in the past. But for today, we are focusing on Collect and Collect Mobile. What's the difference? Okay, so Collect is basically where you make your field sheets. This is where you make your surveys, and it's desktop-based. Okay, so that means I have downloaded on my personal laptop the tool for Collect, the software for Collect, and when I use that tool, it takes me to a desktop browser where I can create, edit, translate, modify a survey. Okay. Once you create your survey and design your survey in Collect, you export it for use in Collect Mobile. So that means you basically put it into a tablet so that it can be used in the field. Okay, so this is where you fill in your field sheets. So, as I mentioned, tablet or smartphone, here you import your surveys, collect data, and then export them for analysis. Okay, so Collect. What does Collect look like? Here is the basically browser window for Collect. It looks like this. So yeah, welcome to Open Forest Collect. I'm actually going to exit out of my presentation and show this to all of you. I think that that's a better idea. So I think many of you have downloaded Collect Mobile, but Collect is the tool to create the surveys, right? So I mentioned I have a tree survey, Rockland and Deadwood survey. Those are all what we're going to use, yeah? So our afternoon session is focused on, okay, how do we use the surveys that I have already made? But this next few slides is just giving you guys background information. Okay, how did I create those surveys, yeah? I started with a blank one, and now we have 3 functioning surveys, I hope. And yeah, so this is what it looks like. All right, so I have this shortcut here for Open Forest. When I double click and wait for it to load, you're going to see the screen that I just showed on the PowerPoint. So you get this little pop-up window that says starting up Open Forest Collect. It has the version number also. And while using Collect, this window stays open, but you don't really do anything in it. It's just there. So, when the browser opens, you can get an idea of what it looks like. It's going to load. Let's give it 10 more seconds. And if it's not loading, then I'll just go back to the presentation because I have screenshots of each of these tools. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, error. No. Another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3. Great. Got it. Okay. So this is what Collect looks like. As I mentioned, it's a tool that you download, the software that you download, and then when you open it up, typically it goes fast, and then you're ready to create new surveys, import surveys that someone else created, modify, all that good stuff. Okay? So I hope that you can all see it, but on the side here, we have a variety of tabs. Okay, so we have dashboard, data management, survey designer, data cleaning, map, backup restore, and security. For our purposes, we are focusing on this survey designer. So when you click on it, you can see, how is it working? Everyone can see. Yeah? Do we want to split this a bit? Or it's okay, yeah? Okay, I hope that everyone can see, yeah? If it's causing problems, just let me know, and then I can try to get this fixed. But as I mentioned, when we click on Survey Designer, we have 3 options that pop up. We have List of Surveys, New Survey, and Import a Survey. Okay. For New Survey, let me just click on that and show you what that looks like. Okay, so when you want to start a new survey from scratch, you have to start with a name. You give it a name, so this can be remeasurement training. Okay, you can set the default language, and you can see here there's so many options. Indonesian is one of those options. And yeah, you can set, okay, is it a blank? Is it a blank survey? Or they also have some pre-built surveys that you can build off of. But for now, we're just going to show blank, just as a quick overview. Okay, how did I create these surveys? So I started with blank surveys and made a new one. And once you make a new survey, you have a lot of tabs that might sound a little bit confusing at first, but again, just stick with me. And remember, we don't have to create surveys. I'm just showing you this as background. We already have them existing and running and functional. Okay, if you want to make your own survey in Collect, you start with this Info tab. So on the Info tab, you can see the name that you set when you created your survey. So this is not something that you edit, yeah? Remeasurement _ training, it's already locked in because that's what you named your survey. You can, however, set a project name and a description, yeah? So we can say remeasurement training survey, and then we can say example survey in the description. Okay? You also have the option to attach files or other options to create different versions, set the units, and set a spatial reference system. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the code lists. So code lists are where you input your categories for categorical variables. If you remember, and you're going to see this shortly, for Ratan, for example, no, lying deadwood. For lying deadwood, we have a categorical variable that stands for the decomposition class. You remember? So we say, okay, did it recently die? Is it slightly decayed? Is it advanced decay? So here in the code list is where you would enter all of those categories. So you would click Add List here. You would give it a name, right, which is decomposition class. You give it a label and a description. So deadwood decomp. And then here is where you add your codes. So we're going to put A. The label is recently dead. And then you can also add more description if you need, but we're going to go with that. Then you click Apply. We would continue to add the other 3 codes, slightly decayed, intermediate decay, and fast decay, until you have all of them in that code list. So, the slight decay. Okay, you click Apply. So that is how you would continue to create this categorical variable. So we're going to see later with my surveys, for all of the categorical variables, even for the plot IDs and subplot IDs, they have been entered as code lists. Next, we have the species list. So remember, we currently have a species list of 312 species from Fabian. All of those have been formatted and coded according to the specifications of collect and uploaded. So this means when we are in the field and we need to write down what species that tree is, all we had to do is type in the code. As soon as you type D, you're already going to get all of the codes that start with D. And as you continue to type it in, you can just select which species it is. It's very useful. I'm not going to go through the specifics of how exactly to format that sheet because it's in the collect manual. And if you remember on the drive, we have an entire folder for manuals and for protocols, and that's where you can find the collect manual. But it's actually quite simple, yeah? So the Excel sheet that you use to upload as a species list looks pretty much exactly like this, yeah? So you have your ID, your code, the family, and the species name. So make one of these, put it into collect, and it's ready to go. Sampling point data is not something that I have used, and it's not something that I'm very familiar with. So we're not going to talk about that one because it's not used in our survey, and I don't think it's going to be used in many types of surveys. Okay, now we get to the schema. This is really where the magic happens, right? So this is where you import what's called attributes. And so all variables that we have on our plot sheet are attributes, okay? So if we look at Ratan, we have cluster ID, plot ID, subplot ID, circumference, height, XY species, stem ID, DBH greater than 1 centimeter, length, and comments. All of those would be input into the schema, and that's how they look. That's how they get transferred into collect and later into Excel. So it's a little bit, I'm not going to show it in this new blank survey because I think it's going to be too complicated. Now we're going to switch to one of my existing surveys to talk about the schema and about the attributes. Okay. So remember, we have this new survey option. By the way, I'm just going to save this, even though it's not a very complete survey. Okay. So because we have such a basic survey and because we have not put anything into the schema, we get some error messages that pop up. This is really nice, yeah? So if you are making your own collect survey, if something is failing, you will get error messages that are really quite clear, yeah? And then they can help you figure out, okay, what went wrong? What did I do? So here we have an error message that says like key attributes not specified and empty entity. So that basically means we have not put anything into the schema. We don't have a functioning survey yet, but now we're going to open up one of ours that we do have. Okay. If I go to list of surveys, you can see I have quite a bit. I've made surveys, I've looked at old surveys, I've made some tests, I've, tested and tried and fixed and tried again in the process of making the 3 surveys that we're going to use. So let's go ahead and start with the Ratan survey. Okay, so just as before with the blank survey, we have info, code list, species list, sampling point data, which we're not going to work with, and schema. Here we can see, okay, it is Laura Lindu, Ratan number 2. That is the name of this survey. It is my second survey of Ratan. The first one we did away with after some changes. The project that it falls under is Laura Lindu National Park. And the description is assessment of long-term observational plots in Laura Lindu National Park, Ratan survey. The code list for our Ratan survey only includes the plot ID and the subplot ID, right? If we look at this list here, we don't have any categorical variables at the bottom of the sheet. So that's why we don't really have any. But if we look at plot ID, you can see here all the codes for all 13 plots. For the subplots, we go all the way from A1 down to D6. Okay, so all of that has been input and typed into the code list. For the species list for Rattan, there are 19 species, but those will actually just be typed in because I don't want to make another species list for that. I think that it's easy enough for us to type those in. Okay, I'm skipping sampling point data because there's nothing in there. And now we get to the schema. So this is what it looks like to create one of these surveys. Remember yesterday when we were going through this Rattan sheet, and I said we have clusters and we have stems, right? And it was a little bit confusing to think about that in terms of this field sheet, because remember, everything from cluster ID up to species, that's going to be the same, even if there are multiple stems. But that looks very clear in the collect survey. So the first tab that we have is called general. In this area, we put information like plot, team, plot, date, and comments. All of that is on the top of this sheet here, yeah? So remember, our Rattan sheet starts with the team, then we have the date, we also have the page number, we don't need page number for collect. Okay, so if we click on this information, we can see the name of this variable or attribute. We can see the label and a description, yeah? So here we write the name of the team leader. You can identify if this information is key. That basically means that this has to be input. This is the way that collect identifies this source of information, and it's a required variable. Okay, we have the date, and then we have the comments. I quickly want to show for each of these, let's say that we want to add a new attribute, yeah? Let's say that I forgot to put the plot date, so we need to add it again. To modify survey, you can right click, and now you see we have a variety of options. We can add a tab, we can add an entity, and we can add an attribute. So a little bit, okay, so let me start with attribute, yeah? If we wanted to add plot date to this survey because it was missing, we go to attributes, yeah? This is basically all of these individual variables. So you can see we have a lot of different options, yeah? Is it time? Is it text? Is it taxon? Yeah, is it a species that we're adding? Does the value have a range? Is it a number like height or DBH? Is it a file? Is it a date? Yes, right, we're adding a date. Or is it a coordinate? Finally, well, okay, Boolean, is it a yes or no? And code is where we refer back to our code list of categorical variables. So, I think that we can see it's a little bit complicated to make these surveys, but, and you know, that's not the goal of this presentation here. The goal is not that after this short presentation, you all have all the tools and all the information you need to make your own surveys. This is just background information, so you understand a little bit about the tool and how I made these surveys. And yeah, we're going to be focusing on Five Mobile. Okay, but if it's a little bit fast, just remember we have the manuals. There's plenty of information online to get more information on how to make one of these. But what I can tell you is that for all of the variables, for all of the 3 surveys, I have gone through and said, okay, DBH, that's a number. Date, that's a date. Decomposition class, that's a code. So it's all in there, ready to go. I'm going to explain the entities now. Okay, so you can see here, underneath general, after team, date, and comments, we have what's called cluster. The type of this part of the schema is an entity. That basically means a group. So when we have tiered parts of a survey, when we go from cluster, and one cluster has multiple stems, when we have one tree has multiple stems, we create that hierarchy with entities. So that means anytime that we have a variable that's going to break down into more lines of a plot sheet, that's how we use entities. So when we put the drop-down arrow for cluster, we see all of the cluster variables. So remember, that's plot ID, subplot ID, circumference, height, X, Y, and species. Remember, species, all the stems of one cluster are going to have the same species. So we don't need to record that for every stem. Down here we have every stem. We can just record that for the cluster, and we know every stem of this cluster is at that species, is at this location, like that. If we go into the stem variables, finally we can see we have a stem ID, the DBH, or the diameter, and the length. Okay. So, this is a quick look at the Raton survey. Now, what we have here is the option to take a preview of that survey. Now, the preview tool on this desktop version does not exactly match how the survey looks in Collect Mobile, which is a little bit frustrating, right? You would think that it would match, but it doesn't exactly match. So that's just something to keep in mind. It mostly matches, yeah, what we see here is what we're going to get here, but not always. So just be aware of that. But we can use this preview tool to see how the data input looks like. Okay? So this general information on team, plot, date, and comments, that is just like the top of this Raton sheet here, right? We only input it once. We save a lot of time, right? Imagine if for every stem, we had to type in, okay, who took this data point? What's the date? What's the time? How do I feel? No, we're not doing that. We put it in one time. Yeah, so I would type in Mary. I'll put some comments. Yeah, Mary, the date is today. Comments. So much. Done. Okay. Now, remember, we input our Raton variables on the subplot level. Yeah? So not the whole plot, on the subplot level. That's why, okay, we get to our subplot. We're in A1, and let's say that we have two clusters of Raton. The first one that we measure is going to give an ID of 1. Then we're going to say, okay, we are in plot S1450. Go to the drop-down arrow, and you click S1450. We're in the first plot, subplot, A1. Okay, then you get a friend, measure the circumference of that Raton cluster, and type it in. You can see the unit that we have is centimeters. Then we measure the height. Let's say that we're at 10 meters. Type it in. Now, just like when we were outside, remember, for 10 by 10, we have to get the location, yeah? So we already have the tape on the ground. You say, okay, the X is 6, okay? And Y is 2. Type those in. For the species, type it in. And if there's anything special that you have to say about that cluster, you can type it in the comments. Now, remember, the clusters can have multiple stems. This is where you're going to do that. Let's say that this Raton stem has this Raton cluster has 4 stems. You add 1, 2, 3, 4. In the ID, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you start measuring. Start measuring, type it in, give the length, type it in. If there's anything weird about the measurement, if there's anything weird about that stem, if someone took a bite out of it or something, you write it in the comments. Whatever it is, put it in the comments, then we have that information. Okay. So that is what the Raton survey looks like in Flight. Very shortly after lunch, we're going to actually upload or import the 3 surveys into our personal devices. They're already input into the tablets, and then we're going to test them out. Okay? All right. So earlier, when I was showing you the different attributes and showing you we can pick a number, we can pick a date, we can pick a text, whatever, you can trust that I've correctly assigned those things to that information. But as we can see here, the Raton stem ID, it's saying that it's in centimeters. It's an ID, yeah? So it actually does not have a unit to it. Yeah. So sometimes in the preview, there are some weird things like this, or it might actually be in the survey. So just as before, with field sheets or with your feedback, if while we're testing these, you notice something weird like that might have slipped, please just let me know. I can make a quick fix, and then no problem. Okay? So this was the Ratan survey. Now we're going to go through the Deadwood survey, okay? The Deadwood survey is, I would say, comparable difficulty level compared to the Ratan survey. And when we get to the tree survey, hold on, because this one is complicated. Okay. Just as before, we can see the name of the survey, which is Laura Lindu Deadwood. It also belongs to the project Laura Lindu National Park. And this is the assessment of long-term observational plots, Deadwood survey. In the code list, we can see, again, we have the plot ID and subplot ID, just like with the Ratan survey. But remember, with Deadwood, we also have this decay class. So here you can see that recently dead, decay, intermediate decay, and advanced. All of that has already been input as code list. We do not assess species for Deadwood. It's a bit difficult. So there's nothing in the species list for that. Now, the schema looks similar, but is a little bit different, yeah? We start with plot information. Very similar, yeah? So plot ID, team, and comments. If we're to look at the Deadwood survey, these are the things on top. Remember, we only want to record that information once. Every time that we record a piece of Deadwood, we don't want to have to write, okay, what's the team, what's the date? So all of that is in this first folder, the plot folder. Now, we go to the subplot. So the reason why this survey looks a little bit different than Ratan is we are pretty sure every subplot has Deadwood that has to be measured, but not every subplot is going to have Ratan. So it's why we see a little bit of a different schema for those variables. It just matches these sheets that we have here. Okay, so we entered our plot information. We entered what subplot that we're in. We added any weird comments. And then we finally get to the Deadwood pieces. Okay? So just like before, we put an ID. We measure the midpoint diameter of all Deadwood pieces greater than 20 centimeters. We get the length, the classification, and any comments. Let's take a look at the preview just to see what it looks like. So here, we could put the plot ID. Let's say that this time we are in plot 2150. Let's say this time it is Bernstein who's going, and we don't have any plot comments. Let's say that we already finished the first half of the subplots, and we're right in the middle of this jumbo plot on C1. We add that in the subplot ID, and now we're ready to start. In this particular subplot, let's say that we have 3 pieces of Deadwood. 1, 2, 3. Don't forget, add your ID. Add the midpoint diameter in centimeters. Add the length in meters. Add your decay class. That's it. Yeah? Pretty clear?
Yes, but I think you are very good is try with the timeline.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be when we really learn a lot, I think.
After lunch we practice.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right. So I started off easy for everybody with the Deadwood survey and the Ratan survey. Now I'm going to show you the tree survey. So remember that our Ratan sheets and Deadwood sheets are quite simple. But remember that our plot sheets for the trees are really complicated, yeah? We're trying to assess a lot of things for those trees and those subplots. That is all captured in the tree survey. Going back to my list of surveys, here we have Laura Lindu survey. Okay, Just like before, we have the name. Unlike the Roxanne and Deadwood, this one is just called Learn the New Survey. It's not called Tree Survey, just Learn the New Survey, because this is the core survey of this work. When we go to the code list, you see, it's not 2, it's not 3, we have what? 12 categorical variables that we are assessing across the plots, subplots, and trees. Hopefully, a lot of these look familiar to you. Remember, we have to assess the plot accessibility. How hard was it to get there? Are we exhausted, or did we just walk right in and found it like nothing? What is the impact on the plot? Do we have rockwood extraction, dumber extraction, firewood at the plot level? Remember, this is assessed at the 40 by 60 level. Then we have our plot ID. This is the standard one. Okay, I'm going to skip down to the bottom because this is where we have subplots. It's arranged alphabetically, so that's how I'm going to, but I want to go plot, subplot, trees. Remember, for the subplots, we want to assess per subplot what are the conditions, yeah? Is there a large tree that's, lying across the whole thing? That's what we're doing. And then we have the subplot ID. Now, remember, we are only on the categorical variables. So let me go to the stems now. We have, okay, is the tree fruiting or flowering? Yeah, that's stem FRFL. Fruiting or flowering, no fruiting or flowering, one or the other. Don't forget that. Remember back to day 1, we went through these stem microhabitats. Is there a cavity? Is the crown dead? Is there a mushroom hanging off the side of the stem? What do we have there? Then remember, we have hierarchy, mortality, and status. So, is this the main stem? If there are multiple stems, is this the largest one of all 3? Something like that. If it is one tree with one stem, that stem is the main stem. Okay? We also include, okay, do we see a tree that's on the ground, but we have a tag for that tree? In those cases, it will be very rare, but if we find that, a tree that's laying down, but we have a tag, and we know what it is, that's when we want to say, okay, that is a fallen old main stem, and we will record all the information for that tree. Okay. Then, mortality, is it alive, is it dead, is it dying? And stem status. We are remeasuring this tree. Before it was R6767. We are remeasuring this tree. 0. It's new, has no tag, it's a little baby tree. Okay, new. We don't know, but you don't know. And finally, the tag status. Did we find the tag if it's not damaged? That's the best case. We keep using it. Did we find it, but it is damaged? Replace it. It's not found, but we know it because we have these plot sheets. Put that down. Or it's not found because it's new. That's what we got. I hope and hope and hope that all of those categories feel familiar and that they're remembered from the days before. But again, don't worry, training continues next week in the field. We have time. Okay, I mentioned the species list. This is what it looks like when you input it into Collect. So we have our code, we have the rank of the information, right? So species or genus or family, and then here we have the scientific name. So in Collect, we just have to type ADIN, and we're gonna have all the ADIN genus, and we can click which one applies to that tree. Skipping ahead to schema. Who's ready? This is where we have all variables for the plot, subplot, and trees. It's a lot. So get ready. Woo! Who remembers all of our lovely plot variables? Let me quickly find the plot sheet while you can get a second to digest what's on the screen. Okay, everyone remembers that our plot sheet looks like this?
Yeah.
We got quite a lot of columns here. Every column on this sheet is an attribute in this table, yeah? So it should look pretty similar. We start with plot ID, plot team, team, plot date, date, plot takeoff description, takeoff description. It matches one-to-one. If we're testing in the afternoon and you notice that something does not match one-to-one, please let me know. I can fix it before we go to the field. But I tested these. I think everything should be okay. All right, we continue. Plot takeoff coordinates, plot start time and end time for the navigation. And then at the end here, we have these categorical variables. What is the accessibility and what is the human impact of the plot? Again, that matches exactly what we see here on the plot sheet, accessibility and human impact. Okay? Might look like a lot, maybe the plot sheets look like a lot, but it matches and there's a definition for everything, yeah? And someone to describe if someone forgets. Okay, that's everything that we have for the plots. Next, subplots. Okay, so that means we got to the plot, we were able to set our corners, we were able to make our first subplot, just like we did outside. Now we're ready for A1, subplot. Don't worry, subplot does not have quite as many as the plot variables. That also matches what we have on the plot sheets, yeah? So, our subplot sheet's pretty small, yeah? Not as intimidating. But again, it matches. Subplot ID, subplot ID. Subplot canopy cover. Remember, we use Habit app to assess the canopy cover. You type it in. Number of Raton clusters in the subplot. You type it in. Conditions. Just like I showed you in the code list, it matches the conditions that we have in sheet. Okay. So, we got the plot, we set the corners, we made this yellow string for the first subplot, and we took all of our subplot variables. Now, we're ready to start measuring some trees. So, we go into STEM. When we click the drop down, we can see there are even more variables than the plots. So, don't be intimidated. It matches exactly what we have on the sheets. So, remember our tree sheet is big. We got a lot of things, but it exactly matches here. So we start with STEM ID. Yeah, so just give it a number. This is the first stem we're measuring, the first subplot of the first plot. Give it a 1. We have 3 variables related to the STEM status. That's STEM status, mortality, and hierarchy. Matches what we have in the sheet. After that, we have 5 variables for the tag information. Remember how important it is to record the tag information very carefully. This is how we will match Fabian's data with the current data. This is maybe the most important part of this entire campaign that we're doing. So really make sure if you don't understand what does old stem tag mean, what does old tree tag mean, please ask, yeah? I'm happy to explain 1, 5, 25 times, yeah? That's so important. Then we have species information, yeah? So here, we're at species information. If there's a local name for the species, write that down. And if there's any weird comments, put that down too. Remember, if we cannot identify the species in the field, take pictures. There will be people on the team with nice fancy cameras. I have one from Fabian that I'm borrowing. I know many of you also have nice cameras that you're planning to bring. Make sure that we get pictures of unknown species. If someone's camera dies and we only got one for the 2 teams, when we meet in the evenings, make sure that the next day, the team without the camera gets that if they had an unknown species. Yeah? And help each other out. Okay, that is everything for the species. So we made it through the first half of the STEM plot sheet. Now we go to the ecology. So the fruiting or flowering, what are the habitats? Select all that apply. Location, PBH, height, inclination when it's relevant, bark thickness for new species. It's all there. Okay. That's what we got. Any questions at this moment? Yes.
Yeah, if we don't know the species, that's what we talk. We take the photo and collect the leaf, or we don't collect the leaf.
I'm still getting confirmation from the national park if we can collect specimen. Right now, Roland is submitting a Synaxi that would allow him to collect specimens so that we can identify them later. If there's any other information that the national park has on that, I'm all ears. Yeah? That's the information
The
that I
first we take the photo.
Yes, yeah. So no matter what, even if we can collect samples, still take photos. But if we can't collect samples, great. I guess I have a general question for the national park staff. You all have clearance to take samples, or you would also have to apply for that? That's a question. Yeah.
Kalau ini
Ini dalam pemanfaatan, kan saya punya rumah. Luar banget.
Kalau orang taman nasional sendiri yang ambil bagaimana? Harus dimajukan sendiri.
bukan untuk kepentingan itu.
Nah itu nanti kan masuknya ke TESEL itu. Jadi kalau seandainya itu barang keluar dari Palu, itu akan ditanyakan sama orang BSDA.
Iya.
Kalau masih Palu, kalau masih di Palu nanti dulu.
Kalau di Palu itu
Rumah dulu.
harus ada ini, harus ada izin pengambilannya.
Iya.
Makanya kan tadi itu ditanyakan di balai. Sekarang sudah evaluasi maksinya sekalian tanyakan itu.
Diurus saja.
Okay,
Could that be quickly translated? So, yes?
Yeah, like this, we have to organize the Synaxi first and collect the sample. After that, we can collect.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah. After that, for with collect
Okay, yeah.
the sample, we can collect. If you don't have the permit,
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. All right, that matches the information that I have. Okay, so I am going to give everybody the break for lunch. For those of you who have an Android device and have not yet downloaded Collect mobile, please do that over the lunch break. We're going to break for an hour. Also, if you want to try and get a head start at downloading the surveys, they are available in the Drive. So go to the Drive, go to the Collect folder, go to Survey, and then make sure that you download. There are two options per survey. There's a backup of this Collect version, and there's a Collect mobile version. So I will give instructions after the lunch break on how to download those, and we're going to do it together for one of the tablets. Yeah, so one of the tablets has the survey, the other one I removed so that we can do it together. We're going to see it's very fast, very simple, and then we're going to go outside and practice. Okay, thank you all so much for the great morning session, and I hope you're hungry.
Yeah.
Great. I hope the food is on its way.
Kawanku itu, mana?
Thank you.
Urus langsung.
Thank you.